In the 1970s, over 3 in 4 U.S. households subscribed to at least one daily newspaper. Flush with cash, the newsrooms at those publications were well stocked with trained professional journalists who ensured that their broad and diverse audiences were objectively well informed. Today, barely 1/3 of Americans pay for any kind of news content. Even as we spend more on things like vitamins, supplements, GLP-1s, gym memberships, and probiotic sodas to make our bodies healthier, we're spending less to make our brains healthier. Newsrooms in today's organizations, now with far fewer resources, are often forced to cater to much smaller audiences who seek out content they agree with. Media bias is no longer just a conspiracy theory, but often an essential part of the strategy. It's all created a vicious cycle of declining newsroom economics, declining editorial standards, declining trust, and declining audiences. Wash, rinse, repeat. Fortunately, not everyone in the news media is throwing in the towel. In fact, some outlets are doing it the right way and winning. My guest today is Nick Thompson, the CEO of The Atlantic, an American institution since 1857. When Nick took the reins at The Atlantic in 2020, the company was losing millions every year. Today, they're profitable and growing. By leaning into high editorial standards, an ideologically diverse newsroom, and by seeking out readers who believe, when it comes to being informed, you get what you pay for. Nick and I talked about his secret sauce for turning The Atlantic into a thriving media outlet, how they navigate the political zeitgeist, and how they're bracing for the oncoming disruption of AI. We also talked about Nick's latest book, Running Ground, about the lessons in life and business he's learned through distance running. And of course, we covered our other important topics like cooking competition shows and our favorite high school teachers. So treat your brain to something healthy today by listening to Nick Thompson and me, the dumbest guy in the room. Nick Thompson, it is great to see you. Where are you joining us from today?
Greetings, John. Pleasure to be with you. I am in Soho, New York.
Awesome. It's one of my favorite parts of the city, in fact. We have a ton to cover today, like could get pretty deep into some of the sort of existential topics surrounding the media at the moment. But I kind of want to jump in first with, the general, I don't even want to say it's a narrative. I'd say the reality around media and publishing for, pretty much the recent memory has been kind of somewhere from dire to troubled. We've got, newsrooms shrinking all around the country. Our hometown Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, 125-year-old brand, announced recently that they're shuttering, which is, shocking. But somehow in the midst of all of that, The Atlantic is thriving. You've gone from, just kind of around COVID, losing tens of millions of dollars a year to now being profitable, growing on all kinds of vectors. Like, how much of your secret sauce are you willing to share with us? What's making that work?
All of it. What specifically do you want me to share? I'll pop the P&L right here on the screen.
Well, I don't know. I mean, let's just say, what are the top 2 or 3 things you feel like the company's done, that you've done in leadership? You've stewarded over this. You've led it. What do you feel like is the, when you advise other people that are in your position and in still struggling publications, what are the tips you give them?
Yeah. So I will say, level setting, it has been a hard time for media economics. It hasn't been a hard time for media. Like, the demand for information, the amount of people who put out information, the methods of distribution are all amazing. So the Atlantic success story is a little particular, and it comes from a couple of factors, one of which is the editorial team's commitment to, in-depth reported stories. Really figure out the biggest news of the day, do a great job doing it, hire the best reporters in America, try to do it in a nonpartisan, factually correct way. And what's nice about that as your guiding point, as your North Star, is that it's the exact opposite direction from what AI can do, right? It's the exact opposite direction for what a lot of the competitors can do. We try to be as distinct as possible. It is much harder for an AI model or for, a startup run-of-the-mill website to replicate what we do than, many other routes we could have taken. So that's step 1, do that. Step 2 is we built, and this is really important, we built a kind of an obvious strategy. So we'll put a paywall, we'll make you pay. We'll create stories you want to read, and we'll make you pay to read them. But then we did the math really well. And there's all of this math underlying how you structure a paywall, right? Because every time a reader comes to the site, they can either pay to subscribe to read a story, or they can bounce, or you can let them read the story for free. There are a whole bunch of options. And if you could know their intent 100%, you'd have an amazing website, because all the folks who aren't going to subscribe would come and they'd see the ads, they'd develop some brand affinity, maybe they'd circulate around, maybe they'd tweet your stories out. And if all the people who were going to pay, you could get 100% of them, well, then you'd get all that money. But the problem is you don't know, but you can get closer to approximating it if you have good first-party data. You look at the referral source, you learn things about the story, you understand things about what they've read, right? You figure out the sort of the patterns that lead to subscriptions. And so there's a lot of, and then you figure out what to charge, right? And there's a lot of like underlying math. And traditionally in the journalism business, we're very good at the art and the poetry, and we're less good at the math. And so I think at The Atlantic, we've gotten pretty good at both. You know, there's the art, the poetry, the magic of the reporting. And then there's a team of really smart people like figuring out exactly how to price it on Tuesday afternoons for people who come in from Twitter. And that's a little bit of the secret.
I think a lot of media companies would say that they're really good at the math, but don't turn out to actually be. So if you're seeing that level of return on investment in that first party data and the math, I think, again, something else you could probably teach a lot of media companies lessons about. One very unintuitive thing that I know you guys have done is that I think is going to shock quite a few people is you've kind of reinvested or increased your investment in the print side of your shop. Something I went into 2024. What drove that, and what do you think it says about humanity that there's still some appetite for holding a magazine on my lap?
Yeah, so we did it for a couple of reasons. It's not, in the short term, it was not a good economic decision, right? The amount of advertising you generate went from 10 issues to 12 issues. And in the short run, the cost of the paper, the cost of mailing it, you know, on the negative side, and the the cost of creating the content for 2 extra issues, and versus the advertising revenue you generate, not worth it. But in the long run, a couple things. A, there's brand value. Like, we were created as the Atlantic Monthly. We're the Atlantic Monthly from 1857 to, 2015. Like, we should be monthly. Like, you just should. And it's a way of respecting and paying homage to this brand, which is part of why we succeed. Like, if you have a brand created by Ralph Waldo Emerson, you got like a thing Frederick Douglass wrote for you, got something going for you. That's number one. Number two, it, in the future, creates a direct relationship, which helps us hedge against all of these AI intermediaries. Like, I don't know how people are going to read the news in the future. I don't know. I don't know what AI is going to be doing. But I know that the more people who we can reach just through the United States Postal Service or through courier, if USSPS shuts down, the better. So if we have 500,000 people reading every month, this print thing that we can, like, our writers can like type into their keyboards, we can get, like, buy some paper from Finland, slap it together, put it through the Postal Service, no Google, no Facebook, no Twitter, no OpenAI in the middle of that. That's really good. And then it also, back to my first point, our business is kind of a hits business. Like, a lot of people subscribe to The Atlantic because we do good stuff every day. And they subscribe because they know that if there's a big story, you can get a smart article about it in The Atlantic. But a pretty big percentage of our business is hits, right? Like, this story really took off, right? Signalgate last year, the obvious example, like the Chris Licht story. Stories that, like, everybody's talking about. And doing print issues gives you like a slightly better chance at doing that, because you've got this issue and you've got this thing on the cover, people hand it around, you buy it at newsstands. So there's like different vectors for it to get into the slipstream and become a big hit. And so we kind of like, it's not like we increase the number of at-bats we have, and we increase the odds that, you know, next year we'll have 3 hits instead of 2 or 7 hits instead of 6, depending on how you measure it. And that's valuable. And it also, this is not unimportant. When you're in a business that's in decline, right? When everybody's sinking behind you, if you look stable and profitable and doing well, that's a magnet. And so people, like, it's a talent attractor that we're expanding in print, right? It's a talent attractor that we're like manifestly doing well and making money. It's a talent attractor that we have a benevolent owner. And so it helps us recruit great writers and great product managers.
The notion of So I don't know how much of this is you guys are kind of going one direction while the rest of the industry is going another, or whether we're seeing a little bit of a reversion around a few things, right? So much of media for the last more than decade is increasingly short form. There's the clickbaity stuff. It's like there's this notion that the consumer's attention span is both very limited and very schizophrenic. And so you're hoping to just capture, maybe get 400 words in front of them if you're lucky. And that presumes they get past the headline and the AI summary of it. You guys have gone the other direction and is really focused on more, I don't want to necessarily call it long form, but relative to the typical news coverage. It's definitely longer, more substantive. Look, I'm a very loyal subscriber, and I know, there are Atlantic articles I save knowing full well, and I generally do most of my reading before bed. It's like, I'm going to fall asleep probably before I finish this. And that's no indictment on the quality of it, but it's like, this might take me a couple sittings to get through this. And so do you think we're like maybe seeing, and I want to stick on this theme from another dimension in a second as well, but do you feel like we're seeing a sort of a backtracking with the consumer, with the reader, that there is like a renewed appetite for that kind of content, or is it just really finding the people who want that type of content, or both? I guess it could be both.
I think that it's a little bit of both. I think that there's this really interesting phenomenon where our attention spans are definitely getting shorter, right? Every study shows that, right? And it's true of kids, it's true of adults, it's true of everybody. It's also true that some forms of art are getting much more complex, right? If you look at television today versus 5 years ago, 20 years ago, so much more complicated, right? The shows you watch with the plot lines and, technology, through the ability to allow you to create really complex art and really complex writing, both technology has destroyed our attention spans and it's also created the opportunities to lengthen them. So that's part of it. So there is an opportunity. There are ways in which we do have longer attention spans. And technology creates the opportunity to, like, people can listen to our stories in their AirPods in a way they couldn't 5 years ago, right? Which is a great way to listen to a 25-minute story. So there's some ways that there is a market for this long stuff. And then the other thing is just, even if the whole world decides it likes blueberries, it doesn't mean you can't make money selling apples, right? Because maybe all your competitors have gone into selling blueberries and you just keep selling apples, right? And so in a way, what matters is like not how much attention span is there in the average consumer, but are there enough people who want to consume our stories, and are we able to, win enough share of them in order for our business to survive?
Well, there's absolutely truth for the people that are inclined to wanting that more kind of enriched experience and deeper, more substantive experience. It's just gotten a lot harder to find, or at least it's crowded out so much by the other type. So it makes tons of sense that you're benefiting so much from that. Similarly, we look at one of the things we see in our data that's maybe is pervasive. Well, I'll talk about two pervasive things, but the first one is just this, and maybe they're related, but the first one is just sort of the precipitous decline in just what I'd loosely define as institutional trust. And that spans, of course, government and politics, of course, but maybe in no area has that precipitous decline maybe been more dramatic than in just kind of quote unquote media. And what we're starting to see now, and this is really like a post-COVID phenomenon, is declining levels of trust in any institution, social kind of loss of a lot of social fabric, is we're seeing consumers increasingly look to kind of fill those voids. Like they're like, okay, I've shed all these sort of vectors of trust in my life and relationships, but now I realize I'm missing them, so I'm seeking them out again. And we're seeing it show up, for example, like in kind of brand loyalty, brand affinity people are having. Like we're noticing in our data this like visceral emotional connection that people are having with brands that they really care a lot about. And that's certainly brands who've done a great job of like building that emotional connection. And I feel like the Atlantic has captured that with its readers. It's a very loyal following. When I talk to people about reading the Atlantic, it's like this little tribe, right? Or not, it's an increasingly large tribe. And when you talked about sort of the for example, your investment in print, that it is part of that sort of bigger brand halo story you're trying to build. And again, it's sort of running in one direction when the rest of the media is running in another, where it's very performance based, right? Like I'm just trying to get more people to click on this particular article, and brand is like a distant afterthought. We see the same thing actually happens in retail. Retailers have divested a lot in brand because there's so much pressure on the performance side of their business that's where their marketing dollars go. How do you strike that balance between, you need that hit, right? You need that article to go viral or whatever the current kind of vernacular for that is. How do you balance sort of that investment in the Atlantic brand versus sort of the more performance side of getting your content in front of people?
Yeah, it's a good question, and we've spent a lot of time thinking about this and working on this. And so one of the things that happens is once you start to measure your success by subscriptions generated as opposed to total traffic, right? It kind of shifts all the institutional incentives, right? And once that becomes kind of your overriding KPI, becomes your overriding goal, it means that the things you do and the things you optimize for are different. And so for example, we've started doing this recently. We no longer, a top line metric is no longer total audience. It's no longer unique visitors per month. That is a good thing. I love every unique visitor. I want them all to come to the Atlantic. It's basically high value unique visitors. So it's people who come from websites or from referral sources where we know there's a subscription propensity above X. And so we basically have high quality traffic, low quality traffic. And we sort of arbitrarily drew X where we drew it. But it means that the incentives of our audience team, of our brand team, of our marketing team, and to some degree, this trickles down to writers and editors, though they're pretty walled off from this stuff. It means that you're trying to drive more audience from, places where folks are likely to subscribe. So like Drudge Report. Drudge Report are very low propensity, right? They have loyalty to Drudge, and they click on links, but they probably don't even know what they're clicking to, right? And they go onto another website. Maybe they know it's the Atlantic. Maybe they don't. I love getting that stuff, but they're not subscribing. And so I love it less than people who are coming in from like a newsletter we've written or from the Atlantic's own Facebook links. And so we sort of take our efforts, and we don't, we certainly aren't going to say no to Drudge. And if Matt Drudge, you're listening, please link to us every day. I freaking love it. But we're really focused on trying to get people from places where there's a high propensity for everybody to subscribe. And so that's part of it. And the other part is we really do think a lot about brand. We don't have we don't run a big brand campaign. You've probably never seen an Atlantic ad in, a Subway, or, we've never seen it on a billboard in Pittsburgh. But we spend a lot of time thinking about how we're perceived, how people think of the Atlantic. We do brand studies. We think we have great brand opportunities whenever our writers go on TV and go to events. So it is a big part of what we think about.
It's interesting, and I don't think it's a solve. Maybe, well, I don't know. I've stopped trying to predict the future a long time ago because nobody knows what the hell they're talking about. But if we go back in the early 70s, let's use that as a demarcation line. Back in the sort of late 60s, early 70s, 87% of people subscribed to a newspaper.
Yeah.
87% of U.S. households subscribed to at least one paid publication, right? And that doesn't include magazines and everything else that they did. Today, at least online, barely a third of people pay for any sort of subscription content. And that could include ESPN, and not even just, it could be anything. So you've got this, now that numbers have held pretty steady at that sort of 1/3 so there's a battle for that third, right? And you're doing exactly the right thing. You're fishing where the fish are, because if I'm inclined, we also know that the person who's inclined to subscribe to one is, and I probably couldn't even count how many content subscriptions I have, because a person who says, look, I value information enough to want to, and I believe that I get what I pay for, right? So I'm always going to be suspicious of stuff that's free. Yeah. Do you think there's an opportunity to grow that universe of people? Is there or is it just not worth the fight at this point? Because convincing people that, who are otherwise, particularly in moments of economic headwind and, disposable income strain and so on, is it a battle you feel like you can fight, or is it really about kind of preserving that third or so that's achievable? I'd love to think it's the former, but I don't know.
My battle is to get a higher percentage of the third to subscribe to the Atlantic. But to the kind of societal battle, it's possible, right? And I've seen some data, why has that number gone down, right? And part of the reason that number has gone down is because we're all obsessed with social media and the amount of time that people are spending. if people spend 5 hours a day on Instagram and TikTok, it means they're living like a 19-hour day to do all the stuff they used to do in 24 hours a day. And that includes doing the laundry, shopping, picking your kid up from school, and reading, right? And so you're going to read less. And, what could change some of that reading economy and the sort of subscription to high quality news purveyors would be sort of a societal reevaluation of time, how time should be spent. And there's some indications that we're spending less time in social media. One of the things that when I think about this, I think about like the number of people who run marathons, right? And if you look at that, it's like skyrocketed, right? And it's skyrocketed since the pandemic, and partly because everybody started running during the pandemic and it's cool, partly because of this race infrastructure, and partly because people like to be off their phones for 4 hours, and they recognize the incredible toxicity of the social media economy that like sucks us in. And so we always talk about it like it's toxic for kids, but it's toxic for everybody. And it's possible that there'll like be a reevaluation and people will spend more time with high quality, thorough news publications. So maybe that initial number grows. But that's not really a battle I can fight or join. I can just do my best to create an economic model that lets us publish the best stuff. And then if there's 100 fish in the pond, like try to get his money to bite the Atlantic worm, right? If there are 200 fish in the pond, even better.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, that's a very big macro thing. Incidentally, I do think that it's one of the reasons podcasts are having the kind of heyday that they are.
Yeah.
Because I can do it while not glued to a device, right? I can do it while running or on the bike or whatever else I'm doing. And sort of, it's sort of meeting the macro trend where it's headed. Another, I would say, kind of macro cultural thing, maybe as pervasive in our data as the declining institutional trust, has just been the rampant tribalism, particularly political tribalism of the last 9 years or so. That's pretty specific time for a pretty specific reason, where that's really kind of colored not just our culture, but our media consumption. And we know people are, the average person anyway, is inclined to consciously or not seek out content that already aligns with things they believe. Yeah. So we're not reading content to learn. We're reading content to maybe feel better about our own beliefs or to feel part of a community of people who believe what we believe. And there's been all kinds of, we don't have enough time here to cover all of the implications of that. But one of the biggest implications from an economic standpoint or from a business standpoint with media is, there's so many now that there's so much out there, so many blogs, so many Substacks, so many websites that somebody can stand up in their basement and just make enough money in programmatic, like remnant advertising to pay their bills, that I can find, no matter how niche or frankly extreme or whatever my views are, I can find somebody or something out there that aligns exactly with what I believe, right? Yeah. And so the traditionally like tentpole organizations, say you're like 3 or 4 broadcast TV networks, whatever, your big national publications, they've had to struggle with that because like people don't want tentpole publications any longer. They want something that aligns with them. And the flip side of that then is once you sort of appeal to a particular audience and you bring them in, you have to be very careful not to step a toe out of line, right? Because if you all of a sudden start to put information in front of them that doesn't align with their beliefs, there's somewhere else that they can go, right? Anyway, I'm not, this is again, no like huge headline. We all know this is happening. And when you and I talked about this recently, you characterized it as a trap, right? And I think it is that trap. It's like if you lean in too hard to that one tribe and that one narrative, again, it's very unforgiving. So, but you guys have taken a different approach, both in the construct of your newsroom or whatever, your editorial department, and then also philosophically. So talk a bit about how you think about that trap, how you avoid that trap, maybe some cautionary tales of others who've not. And I have to think it's one of the reasons that contributed to the success you've had over the last several years. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so what I mean by the trap is that if I were starting a new publication or if I were an editor-in-chief and I was looking at this moment we're in, we're looking early 2026, I could get a ton of eyeballs, right? By either I just choose like the hottest issue in America. Let's say ICE, right? And I could write like, ICE is great, like these radicals like coming after it. We're just trying to enforce immigration laws. These people are out on the street, these poor people just going out trying to do their job for the United States government. And they're getting harassed and they're under threat all the time. And I get a lot of readers, a lot of like people who feel very passionate about this. And I could do the other thing. I could say like, ICE is in the American Gestapo, and here's some videos of them harassing people. And I could get a lot of readers that way. And so you can build up an audience, right? And you can build up a fan base, you can get subscribers, and you feed it, right? You feed the kind of the anger machine. But then at some point, ICE is no longer, right, the thing that everybody's excited about. Maybe that happens in 2 weeks, maybe it happens in 4 years. And then your audience has been really tuned to that. And so then you're like, okay, well, actually now, hey, I have some film reviews and I have some poems and I have a story about, gerrymandering. And your audience doesn't want that, right? And the people who actually care about gerrymandering, they've been turned off to your publication because they actually don't agree with your position on ICE, or they don't care about ICE at all, or they're not really there. And so you can fall into a trap where A, your audience really only cares about a small subset of issues. B, the algorithms only care about it, right? Because if you've been like feeding ICE stories into Facebook for 3 years, and now you're suddenly trying to put in poems or stuff about gerrymandering, Facebook algorithm is not going to work because your whole Facebook algorithm has been tuned to your ICE coverage. And so as a publication, you can go that route, right? And if you care strongly, you really think ICE is American Gestapo and you want to like stop that, by all means, like do a publication that does that and get the word out, and if that's what your passion is. But as a media organization, it's a risk. And so my view is that the proper strategy is one where you don't like lean into an issue like that. Now, this has happened in the streets, but look at what the Atlantic publishes. The Atlantic publishes a really wide variety. We have an extremely broad spectrum of writers. You've got David Frum, you've got Adam Serwer, you've got like people who entirely disagree on a lot of really big issues. And we think of ourselves, like our founding statement is of no party or clique. And so it so happens that the strategy that was kind of written on stone by our founders, which is, do your best to be non-ideological. Don't like become an organ of a party. Don't like become narrow in your views. That ideology, I think, also aligns really well with a long-term business strategy.
I had Perry Sook on the podcast a couple months ago, the CEO of Nexstar, and we were talking about some of these challenges within the context specifically of local news, which has its own set of challenges, right? And my hometown Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, one of the challenges it had to struggle, and maybe was its kill shot, was some of the union relationships that it had. So it's maybe different set of problems. But the one thing that we did talk about, which I think is relevant here, is sort of balancing that kind of the importance of the brand of the masthead, right? Like historically, if you worked at the New York Times or the Washington Post, the writer themselves had little to no brand, right? Like they weren't supposed to. They were in service of the masthead of the publication. In today's world, where writers, editors, reporters have a life outside of the masthead, whether it's tethered to the masthead or not, through social media or elsewhere, people have formed relationships with the writer as much as they have with the masthead, right? The brand. Like when I come to The Atlantic, there's particular writers who I admire the most, and if they've published something new, I'm certain to read it, right? And I do seek out that sort of balanced diet of ideological points of view, so I see that firsthand. You guys have allowed your writers, or even brought in some writers, I would say, who had some sort of existing brand equity. How do you balance that? How do you bring this, what is something of like, at least from an ideological standpoint, this kind of hodgepodge of writers together that are still in service of like this larger brand you're trying to build and promote and maintain? Do you look for some consistencies across them, independent of political ideology, that serve up to that brand, or how do they coexist with each other in that way?
Yeah. I don't want to overstep because I'm not the editor, but I'll say that they do have certain things in common. They're all beautiful writers. They're all really good reporters. They're all really solid thinkers, and they all. And
that might be enough, right? Like that might be a good enough, the right standard, right?
Right. But there's a really interesting dynamic in media, and so if you go all in on individual brands, right, and you really like promote the individual brands at the expense of the house brands, you create a whole group of people who maybe they lose some of the loyalty to the house, and then maybe they get picked off, right? Because the demand in other publications for people with high individual brands and the people they've heard about and people with like large Twitter followers. Like one of the things that, was pretty hard for local papers. I don't know if this happened to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, but The Athletic came in and was like, you know what, let's find every sports reporter at every local paper with the largest Twitter following and let's just hire them away. We'll offer them $25,000 a year more. And we'll create a new publication that has all these people, and then they'll go out and they'll sell athletic subscriptions on Twitter. It turned out to be a brilliant business model, and they sold the $500 million to the New York Times. You can lose people. And so you can take the approach of The Economist, right, where there are no bylines and nobody even knows who works there, right? And the people who work at The Economist, they're not getting hired by Substack. They're not getting invited by speaking bureaus. They're not being asked to do like film National Geographic specials, go on MSNBC, right? All that stuff, Or you can kind of do what we do, which is a mix, right? Like we have certain things that are core value to The Atlantic. We ask people to do Atlantic events. We let them write books. We let them do National Geographic specials. We let them do some podcasts. But there's a real push and pull on that. And so my objective, to the extent that I have any control over it, is to make the things that we provide to this suite of writers and editors incredibly valuable. Make it so that, like, even if their brand is huge, right? Like, even if everybody knows it, everybody knows Ann Applebaum, everybody loves Ann Applebaum. What I want is what The Atlantic gives Ann Applebaum, whether it's the editing, whether it's the social promotion, whether it's the live events, whether it's all the stuff that we give. And I'm constantly I was trying to figure out the other day, is there a way that we can set up our paid marketing engine to help the books of our writers, right? So they can actually make more money on their book projects, right? Can I make it so that being part of an Atlantic is more valuable to them than being part of anybody else? That's a big challenge of my job.
One last question on this topic, and then I want to change topics altogether. Maybe the most difficult question is and you can't really do a podcast. I cannot believe the over-under of making it 38 minutes into a podcast without uttering the word AI is probably a record, but we did it. So how do you look? Where do you live on the spectrum of hope to existential dread? None of us can predict where this is going. Sam Altman can't predict where this is going. But look, it's obviously, we know AI is impacting search, which is impacting referral traffic. There's, writers are facing existential dread because AI can replace them. So do you see any hope or any positive potential from AI in your world, or is it all protecting the company from what is some inevitable future threat?
No, AI can be awesome if you're a journalist. Absolutely incredible. So I wrote a book. It's a, story.
Great segue, man. Great segue. We're going to get to that next.
But I'm not using it as forcing a segue.
Well, I'll take it as a segue.
But I used AI like a maniac for this book, right? And I used it to help me understand issues I didn't understand. I used it to help me make sure I had the chronology right. It was like having a very smart editor on call 24/7. And I used different models for different things, right? And I uploaded books partly about my father. I uploaded his diaries and all of our emails into Notebook LM, which is then grounded in them. And I can ask, it's not just having an editor, it's having a research assistant who knows everything about my dad, who can answer okay, talk to me about the different ways he viewed alcohol in his diaries over this 40-year period, right? That's incredible, right? And you can find stories with AI, and you can learn things so much faster. Right? I can learn things much faster than I could before, right? I can prepare for interviews more thoroughly. Okay, I've got this interview with someone in 20 minutes. All right, boom, let's go in. We'll do a little deep research query. Let's figure it out. I can ask better questions, right? So AI is an awesome tool for journalists. It's an awesome tool for editors, right? And it's not replacing anybody. It's just making everybody do better. So there's a lot of good. Now, existential dread, I've got that too, right? It's going to wipe out search, which is how a plurality of people come to the Atlantic, or it's going to wipe out, a large portion of search. It's going to create new competitive publications. The internet is going to be flooded by slop. We're going to live in a world, right now, we're in this very short window where there's fake video that exists, but you can kind of tell, right? And 2 years from now, 5 years from now, you're going to have no idea. And you're going to have no idea whether the person you're talking to is real or not. I had breakfast this morning with a friend of mine who's a influencer on social media. He's an intellectual, a thinker, writes for serious publications. And he's like, you know what I do now? I was like, what? He's like, well, I cloned myself, and I now do daily videos on Instagram of myself cloned talking about economic policy. I was like, whoa, right? That's where we're going, right? Where I do daily videos of talking about technology policy, there's going to be people out there who like, maybe they clone me and do technology policy videos, or maybe they clone themselves, or maybe they create their own avatars. Like, it's going to be chaos. And so, like, to your original question, A, excited about the tools, and B, like, terrified when I go to bed about what's coming.
Yeah, I think I think that's the most common characterization, and just not knowing what's coming is maybe the most unsettling piece of it.
Yeah.
Okay, you mentioned it, so I wanted to shift gears. So you recently published a new book, your second, I think, Running Ground, which I really liked it.
Thank you.
And by the way, we'll put a link to the book in the show notes, so everybody listening will go buy it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I do encourage everybody, because it's a very cool story. And I don't want to I want you to summarize it, but in my own kind of takeaway, very personal story. Talks about your relationship with your father. It talks about the role that distance running has played in your life and in your career. Those things are very interrelated. I can't read anything at this point without trying to draw some like larger macro kinds of themes from it that apply outside of the realm of, say, running or family or whatever. So I'd like to hear what inspired you to write the book, what you wanted people's biggest takeaway from that book to be,
Yeah.
and where you see sort of like, direct or indirect kind of lessons to be drawn from it for, say, somebody who isn't a runner, or from someone who maybe didn't have the same relationship with their father that you did.
Yeah.
And then I want to see if those macro themes aligned with what I took from the book.
Okay, great. So that's 3 big macro themes. I'll go through them. So why did I write the book? I had this very interesting running journey where, when I was in my 20s, I tried to run a 3-hour marathon. I couldn't. I then did. I ran a 2:43 marathon and was like, whoa, that's great. It's incredible. Shortly thereafter, I was diagnosed, like immediately thereafter, days, with thyroid cancer. And I went through a really hard period. Came back 2 years later. I ran another 2:43 marathon. I was like, incredible. Then for 12 years, I ran like 20 more marathons. And they were all about 2:43, like 2:42, 2:45, very narrow range. In my mid-40s, I get way faster. I run a 2:29, which, if you're not a runner, it's just a whole different world from a 2:43. It's completely different. I go from being, when you run 2:43, you can like win gift certificates, to suddenly like I set an American record. I'm the top ranked runner in the world in my age group. And I was trying to think through, why did that happen? And this is the origin of the book. And part of it was like I trained differently. I had a slightly better diet, but that wasn't really it. I realized that I had had a psychological block about being faster than I had been before I had gotten cancer. And that made me think, wait, like, that's incredibly interesting, right? Like, Nick runs more miles each differently, goes faster, is not that interesting. But there are deep things deep in our soul that determine how fast we can go, and like our limitations, even when you're a highly trained athlete, as I was in my 30s, that are profoundly psychological, that are hard to unlock. That's a good story. And so that was what inspired me to write it. That, of course, led me also to think more deeply about my father, who had taught me to run with as a child, who had been my biggest cheerleader, and who had had this like absolutely bonkers crazy life, where he goes from being the guy who's like tapped to be president of the United States to like running a brothel of like inappropriate gay men in Southeast Asia, right? So like crazy life that is connected to mine through running. And so that was the origin of the book. Now, what I hope people get from it, there are a couple of lessons that people draw, one of which is like how to love a complicated man, right? And how I was able to reconcile the utter chaos of my father's life and his financial dependency, and the way he treated me both for good and for ill, and was able to kind of reconcile and make peace with it. That's like something that people have really taken from it. I think a lot of people have pulled out a lesson about, they understand obsession and running and like the spiritual process that can come from running in a different way. And then I think there's some like more general day-to-day things about the way we limit ourselves psychologically without realizing it, the way we can break through that I think people have taken from it. So my hope is that people read the book and have a deeper understanding of what happens when we age, the things that hold us back that we don't understand, and the way we can relate to really complicated people in life.
I feel like I got most of that myself. And maybe like I look, I'm not a big distance runner. I always played sports where if you were running, you were being punished for something. And I've always struggled to get that. I've always struggled to get that. I'm more of a biker than a runner.
Yeah.
It's also better on my knees, see above sports, knees and ankles. And look, I had the greatest relationship in the world with my father. He was the best man in my wedding. So that piece, now I find some appreciation in that from, other people's stories or whatever, maybe a refound kind of appreciation for that. My dad's been gone for 11 years. So I always, it's just a reason to think back about that. What I thought was interesting. So this notion of a central governor theory that we place these limitations on ourselves. Our brain is maybe wired, say, particularly in like extreme, like physical exertion, like distance running, where our brain is sort of wired to protect itself from pushing too far, right? And there's very much a physical phenomenon there, and you talk about that in the book. But I do feel like a lot of other kind of general risk taking that people might otherwise be inclined to do, say to start a new company or to whatever, to seek out the big job promotion or whatever. A lot of that is also kind of, there's a certain kind of mental construct governance going on in people's heads that inhibit them from doing that. And that's one of the kind of leaps that I made from sort of the running and the physical application to more of the psychological and emotional one as well. And those things feel very connected, and also maybe relate sort of to, I would argue that some of the I don't even call them epiphanies, but the evolutions that you made, whether they were about a different understanding of your father, but also sort of breaking through some of those barriers in your running, those things seem to parallel very closely, right? And so I don't know, is that a legitimate takeaway from the book as well?
Oh, absolutely. And I do think it's like, there's a lesson you can learn about, when you have confidence in yourself and when you don't have confidence in yourself. And you can learn that in lots of ways. And I learned part of it through running, right? And there are a couple of stories. I tell the story of a race that I ran in high school where I really wanted to run 11 minutes and 30 seconds. And I thought that would be the absolute peak of what I could do for 2 miles. And I go out there, it's 21 seconds a lap around a 150-yard track, right? And I go out and I get on the track. Turns out the track is 160 yards, but nobody tells me. And so I run 21 seconds a lap. And I finish, and like, lo and behold, I've run 2 miles in 10 minutes and 48 seconds, which is, suddenly I've set a sophomore record, right? And I could never have gone that fast if I'd known I was going that fast, right? My body would have shut myself down. And it's a reminder that a lot of times, like, what holds you back is not the reality. It's your own fears about what you're capable of doing. And that's a hard thing. Like, it's playing hide and seek with your own mind, right? Where you have to use your mind to, like, not defeat, but like evade your mind. And so it's a lesson that you can take to lots of things about, like, I was kind of having this conversation last night with my wife. There was this amazing opportunity that came up, and she's like, oh, that would never happen. It couldn't happen for me. And I was like, really? Well, maybe not. Right. But like, maybe, right. And maybe actually what you have to do is convince yourself that it could happen and it should happen. In fact, you deserve it to happen. And, 2 of the best jobs I've gotten in my life were jobs where I was rejected. And after being rejected, a few weeks passed, and I went back and was like, you know what, guys, I know you rejected me, but you should give me this job, right? Because I'm going to be really good at it. And convince them to give me the job. And then I did well in them. So I do think there's some, you can learn that lesson from you can learn it from all kinds of things in life. I happen to maybe learn it from running.
I thought it was just a great analogy, whether you portrayed it as an analogy or whether I drew the analogy from it.
I think you probably drew the analogy from it. I mean, I tried in the book to not be didactic. Right?
Yeah. No, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah. And by the way, that actually made it a very digestible read, right? Because it was pretty much that it was straightforward in that. And anyway, great book. Highly recommended to everybody listening. Again, we'll put the link in the show notes. So I always wrap these up with a handful of fun poll questions that is a big part of what we do as a company and in the writing that I do. So I'm just going to pretty rapid fire through them and then we'll share our answers and I'll compare them with the general population. Number 1, do you have a distinct favorite teacher from high school?
If I have several, I had a favorite class. Yeah. There was a class I loved, satire and comedy, Tom Reagan.
Yeah. The Tom Reagan. What was the class again?
It's called Satire and Comedy. I just remember it was a way of, like, it taught me a way of reading that I never taught before.
Yeah. Actually, I I steered your answer a little bit more than I should have. Actually, the largest percentage of people, 65%, have multiple favorite teachers from high school.
Yeah.
It doesn't ask about it. And 8% of people have one single favorite teacher. I'm in that 8%. It is like heads and tails above anyone else. It was Mrs. O'Halloran. She was I don't even know what the actual class was. I think it was some kind of communications. It's where I learned public speaking. She convinced me to join the debate team. And really the pivotal thing was she taught me I did Lincoln Douglas debate, which if you know anything about it, it forces you to like learn both sides of an argument, which
bonkers. Yeah, of course.
Man, did that carry me through, like, does that serve me well today?
Good for a podcast host.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, well, and somebody who's in the data industry who has to be unbiased. Are you a fan of cooking competition shows?
I think that they're incredible, but I don't watch them. My son does.
Okay. I've gone in and out of them, but overwhelmingly popular. Over half of Americans consider themselves. That's why there are so many of them out there. To what extent does flying stress you out?
Not at all.
You're in the
0.
third of people who answer that. I think for me, it depends. It's actually not the flying itself. It's getting to the airport on time and making it because like I always, generally if I'm flying somewhere, it's important and I always worry about being late for the thing. But yeah, you're in that sort of the third of people. Here's a little bit more of a trickier one. Do you think there should be a legally defined maximum age for driving a car? You can say no comment.
I think there should probably be an age at which point you have to take a test.
Good answer.
Yeah.
Actually, so it's pretty split, actually. People are about almost 50-50 on it. I think there should be a defined maximum age for being president, but I'll say that. You don't have to say that. That's a different conversation altogether. Last but not least, do you think there should be more or fewer federal holidays?
Fewer.
Really? Why is that?
There are a lot of them. And federal holidays are great because everybody has the day off at the same time, but it's tough if you're trying to run a business. It's tough if you're trying to do work. Like, people should take vacations, people should take days off, but like, how many are there now?
Oh gosh, I don't even know.
And school, right? Like, there are times in the fall where there's federal holidays or religious holidays. You send your kids to school in New York, and it's like 6 weeks in a row where you don't have 5 days a week. And like, when the kids don't have school, it's not a federal holiday. It's like, it's hard as a parent to manage. Like, it's better if like Monday through Friday, the kids go to school and you go to work and like you get them to school and you pick them up and like you figure it out. But if like they're not at school and you're at work, it doesn't work.
That's a key point. I didn't mean, and maybe because I'm like 5 months into being an empty nester at this point, but like you're right. The sort of complications it creates for childcare and things like that are onerous.
Yeah.
I jump to like, maybe we should have fewer, but we should have different ones. Like I'm a firm believer Election Day should be a federal holiday, and I'm a firm believer that the Monday after the Super Bowl, because that would be great for the economy. Or they should just do the Super Bowl on President's Day weekend, and then just think about how many people would travel, how many parties would be great for the economy. But as one might suspect, the average
think there would be more Super Bowl parties if we didn't have work the next day? I mean, like, there's kind of like aren't we maxed out on Super Bowl parties?
I don't think so. I don't know. Or maybe more trips. I mean, we'd maybe stay later for the game. I mean, typically people are ducking out at halftime.
Certainly it should be a regional holiday. Like, if the Steelers make the Super Bowl, no one in Pittsburgh should have to go to work for a week.
Do you know a lot of schools in the recent, the unfortunately tragic Houston playoff game, a lot of local schools had 2-hour delays the next day, which is a very Pittsburgh thing to do. Yeah, we live, eat, and breathe our football here. As you might expect, though, the significant majority of people wish there were more federal holidays. They probably aren't parents or business owners, or at least if they're parents, they haven't thought that much about it.
Managing like international companies, that's another thing, right? Like, it's like, how do you sync up? You have engineers in Lithuania, right? And I don't know, it's tricky.
Yeah, no. It's not as straightforward of a question as it might initially seem, but yeah, as a business owner, it complicates things for sure, and obviously as well as a parent. Well, Nick, as I fully anticipated, this was a great conversation.
So much fun.
Like
Great.
We could have talked about some of these things an hour longer. I didn't even get into like the other last theme I took from your book was. And this is, I'm fresh after turning 50 just a couple months ago, and sort of this notion of like growth later in life, and all of the super both inspiring, but also I also went to CES, and probably the most impressive things I saw at CES were technologies around longevity and so on. So it's like I keyed in on a lot more on that as a now 50-plus-year-old person than I might have 20 years ago. So, but anyway, that's maybe a conversation for another day.
Lengthen those telomeres.
Yep. Look, congrats on the tremendous success you've been having in the Atlantic success, doing it the right way. I'm again, very loyal reader, the quality, the substance, all of that. It's just hard to find anywhere else as good as you guys have done it. Best of luck with the book and with your running and your health, and love to have you back on sometime when we can tackle the next era of existential change going on.
Let's do it. That'd be great. That'd be fantastic. Thank you so much for hosting.
Thanks, Nick. Great. Take care. Talk to you soon.
Yep.